I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network, and this is a breaking news alert. Another big victory for Special Counsel Jack Smith. The chief federal judge in Washington, D.C., has ordered former Vice President Mike Pence to testify before the criminal grand jury in Washington, D.C. Former Vice President Mike Pence had previously objected to his testimony. He tried to block his testimony on the grounds of the speech and debate clause privilege. And Pence argued that because he serves the dual role as a vice president and was also serving as the ceremonial president of the Senate, that he should be treated as a senator and that all of his activity should constitute legitimate legislative activity as the speech and debate clause has come to be interpreted by the Supreme Court, so that he shouldn't have to testify at all. Further, Donald Trump sent lawyers to argue that based on executive privilege, former Vice President Mike Pence should not testify at all either. And so ultimately what the Chief Judge, James Boasberg, who just became the Chief Judge, remember it used to be Judge Beryl Howell, Judge Beryl Howell's term came to an end and now it's Chief Judge James Boasberg. So Judge Boasberg ruled that while on January 6th itself, while former Vice President Pence was in the capacity as the president of the Senate, for that short period of time, the speech and debate clause immunity would apply, meaning that Pence can't be questioned regarding those discrete incidents on January 6th. But let's be real. That's not what Special Counsel Jack Smith was really after. What Special Counsel Jack Smith cared about were all of the communications with Donald Trump leading up to the January 6th insurrection. All of those communications where Donald Trump threatened former Vice President Pence, where Donald Trump called former Vice President Pence the P word, where Donald Trump engaged in all of the criminal conspiracies leading up to the insurrection. Former Vice President Mike Pence will have to testify on those issues. Also, Donald Trump's claim of executive privilege was completely overruled by the federal judge, Judge Boasberg. And so this ruling is, frankly, if you follow the MeidasTouch Network, exactly what we predicted was going to happen. And what we said is, this would be a great ruling if this is the way it went down, because what went down on the day of the January 6th insurrection is mostly captured on video anyway, and there were witnesses there. So we know what took place on the January 6th insurrection. The question is Donald Trump's criminal conduct leading up to the insurrection. Donald Trump's bringing in all of these, shady right-wing fascist characters into the White House who would tell Donald Trump things like he needed to declare martial law and that he needed to confiscate all of the, mail-in drop boxes, and the people who said you needed to appoint Kash Patel to become the CIA director. And again, all of Donald Trump's threats that were directed at former Vice President Mike Pence. And what I like about this order as well is that, I think Judge Boasberg also wanted to make this order appeal proof. And so by recognizing just a very limited immunity when former Vice President Pence was serving in this ceremonial role, but holding, other than that, you can't assert that you are acting in any capacity as a senator when you are a vice president. I think it makes it appeal proof. I think it makes it so that there's not going to be a lot of delay. And former Vice President Pence has already stated that regardless, that if he were to be compelled, he would continue to appeal it to the D.C. Circuit and take it all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And so just to remind you, the Biden administration, when they were confronted with Donald Trump's claim of executive privilege here with respect to former Vice President Mike Pence, as well as to all of the other individuals in Trump's inner circle who Trump has tried to block their testimony and lost. The White House special counsel, Richard Sauber, informed Jack Smith of the following. Quote, "These events, which reflected the most serious attack on the operations of the federal government since the Civil War, threatened not only the safety of Congress and others present at the Capitol, but also the principles of democracy enshrined in our history and our Constitution. In light of these unique circumstances, President Biden has determined that an assertion of executive privilege is not in the public interest with respect to efforts to thwart the orderly transition of power under our Constitution." So to be clear, former Vice President Pence was not making the executive privilege argument. Donald Trump's lawyers were making the argument Pence shouldn't testify under executive privilege. And Donald Trump had made that executive privilege claim with everyone, with people like Mark Meadows and with people like Stephen Miller and all of the individuals in Trump's inner circle and the top officials when Trump was in office. And Trump has consistently lost the executive privilege battle. Because number one, former presidents likely don't hold executive privilege. There's a narrow line of cases that says a former president may hold the executive privilege in an intergovernmental branch dispute, but that's not really even precedent, and that doesn't apply here at all. Because we're not dealing with an interbranch dispute. We're dealing with the current executive branch, the Department of Justice, wanting information about a previous administration that engaged in criminal conduct. But even if you could assert executive privilege can be defeated if there is a compelling need. And clearly here, Jack Smith's criminal investigation of Donald Trump's election interference is a compelling need, as are Department of Justice criminal investigations in general. So Trump's executive privilege argument, a total, utter loser. Former Vice President Pence's argument, speech and debate clause privilege or speech and debate clause immunity under the United States Constitution, that senators and members of the House of Representatives don't have to testify and have general immunity if their speech was part of legitimate legislative activity. Here, the Chief Judge, Judge Boasberg, again found in the narrow time period where you were serving in that ceremonial role as president of the Senate on January 6th, we will acknowledge that there is speech and debate clause immunity just for that discrete time period. But you've got to testify to all of your other communications with Donald Trump. You've got to testify to all of Donald Trump's unlawful conduct. You got to step up right now and stop being a coward and testify about the efforts to overthrow our democracy. So we certainly expect former Vice President Pence to appeal this order to the D.C. Circuit and then ultimately to the Supreme Court. But I feel based on what we know about the order, and remember, all of these proceedings take place in secret grand jury proceedings, and it's all under seal. So we are getting this based on reporting about the ruling, right? We know that Pence's lawyers or in court last week. We know from the docket that there's a ruling made, and then we know from the various sources out there what that ruling is, and we will also see that when Pence appeals it to the D.C. Circuit, that entry will show up on the docket, and ultimately when he appeals potentially to the Supreme Court, we will see those docket entries. But I want to let you all know this is a good ruling because you don't want a situation where the ruling is ultimately vulnerable to a long drawn-out appellate process that overturns it and causes more and more delay. This is also a big ruling for this final reason as well, that this is really the first big ruling that we've seen from the new chief judge, right? The former chief judge, Beryl Howell, who we've always been talking about here on the MeidasTouch network, was not having any of Donald Trump's frivolous motions and the nonsense that Donald Trump brought into court, and she consistently consistently compelled Donald Trump's witnesses to testify before the grand jury over Trump's objections. And we know from her rulings just how serious she took the unlawful conduct leading up to and during the January 6th insurrection. But we didn't know how James Boasberg would rule now that Boseberg is the chief judge and Beryl Howell's term expired. But this is good news that Judge Boasberg, who's an Obama appointee, is a law and order judge who will be following the Constitution and is not going to be supportive of Donald Trump and his gang of insurrectionists. So big news here. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hit subscribe. We are on our way to 1,500,000 subscribers. We just passed 1 million thanks to your support. So help us get to 1.5 million subscribers in the month of April. Hit subscribe, and then we'll hit the 2 million after that. Hit subscribe also wherever you get your audio. Check us out at MeidasTouch Podcast. Just search for our audio podcast. Make sure you subscribe. Check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch. And also, if you have Instagram, follow us on Instagram as well. Just search MeidasTouch. Okay, now subscribe on our YouTube. Until next time, this is Ben Meiselas.
Lock him up! Indictment season is upon us. Celebrate with the new Indictment Season t-shirt and v-neck exclusively at store.MeidasTouch.com.